Today we're going to see what's inside of the Mercedes M276 engine and how it works. Now this is a 3.5 liter V6 engine out of a 2013 Mercedes C350, and apparently this engine is completely seized up, so we're going to take it apart to see just what failed. Taking a look across the front here, you can see we do have our timing chains in the front, unlike Audi which puts them at the back. Now timing chain tensioners were a known issue on the earlier model of these. Over here is where the water pump would live. I didn't get it with this, but it's completely made out of plastic, but I did get the thermostat housing, which is also completely made of plastic. And at the front here we do have the oil filter, which is pretty easy to access. Now if you look at the air intake, it's this giant bowl at the top here, which actually forms part of the engine cover. Around the back here we have our vacuum pump, direct injection pump, and the coil packs. Now there are turbocharged variants of this engine, and that's where the turbocharger would live, but this one's the naturally aspirated C350. Now believe it or not, this is only the second Mercedes engine I've ever torn down. Now at the back here we do have this vacuum diaphragm, which controls the tumble flow actuator inside the intake. So I'm going to start by taking that off. This is the tumble flow actuator. It's vacuum controlled, so when you apply a vacuum here, that's going to suck this little mechanism in here, and that's going to turn this. So either you can have full airflow for an Italian tune-up, or you could block things off for better mixing. Next I see two bolts over here. Look at this, not even a minute into the video, I'm already chopping this piece off so my socket can fit. My socket is stuck. I wonder if there's any bolts under this V6 badge. Alright, life hack for eTorx 10, you can just use an 8mm. I have the 1/4-inch drive version of this. And can you believe it? Just those 4 bolts were holding this whole thing on. So here's what the lower intake looks like. More plastic. Propped it up with my toothbrush here. If you look at this intake, looks like you can see right through, but that tumble flow actuator sits inside of here. And you can see on the either side there that there's these ports. Now these ports are going to actually bring the air around each side here and then down the bottom this way, as opposed to just going directly. And there's a vacuum switching valve on each side here that control additional tumble flow actuators as it goes around this way. Now I can finally lift off this work of art of an air intake. Pretty cool that they're using green gaskets. This is a luxury car engine, and they actually have a dipstick in there. Audi could definitely take a note of that one. Next up, I'm going to undress the wiring harness that goes around here. There's only one plug when you're pulling these engines to take it out. They also give you these engine hooks, as if Mercedes was thinking you're going to be doing engine swaps on these, but they've been reliable so far. One thing I noticed, Mercedes clips their wiring harness directly to the engine block itself with one clip. However, unlike this Toyota engine, they've actually made a separate bracket here that this wiring harness would clip into. It's just an extra piece that Mercedes has eliminated. Alright, I got the wiring harness off the engine. This one was actually not too bad. Alright, next up I'm going to remove the coils on this side. This engine is full of eTorx and Torx. On the middle here we have the intake camshafts. On the right side the intake camshaft drives the direct injection pump, and on the left side here it drives this vacuum pump. Essentially we've got low pressure fuel that's going to be fed over to that pump over there. It's going to pressurize it super hard and then send it out to the fuel rail on this side and then over on this side. So the next thing I got to do is get this plumbing out of the way. Now I'm going to smell like gas. Okay, here's another observation. Look at how many bolts hold down this fuel rail. Everything is very tight and put together, which kind of makes it annoying if you're disassembling it like me, because you got to keep changing sockets. However, it just shows you how well built this is compared to like a GM that they probably put one bolt and a zip tie. These are the injectors. Now the injection system here was pretty unique for its time in that you could use these piezo injectors to fire 4 or 5 times per stroke to either make it more lean or more rich as the piston is moving up. Now of course we all know the benefits of direct injection, but the drawbacks of course are carbon in the air intake, so when we take that apart we'll take a look at that. Now the plumbing for the gas lines run under the intake here and then over to the direct injector, all on top of the valve cover. So before I can get the valve cover off, gotta get all this stuff off next. Okay, probably not the right way to do this, but these are like glued on there. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty bad. It's probably never been cleaned before. The other bank is not much better at all. So I'm going to move over to the passenger side where I get the direct injection pump off. And since direct injection pumps are quite noisy, they have this foam all over them. Now there is a vacuum line here that runs across the valve cover to a vacuum diaphragm, and that's because in the name of German complexity, they've made this direct injection pump variable. Okay, there's fuel dripping. This is going to smell like gas just now. Take this guy off. Oh, gas. Yeah, I wonder how they get that on in the production line. So now that all the plumbing's been removed, I'm going to remove the direct injection pump. Alright, to get to some more hidden bolts, I gotta remove these hidden bolts. Pour out that gasoline. Alright, so here it appears we have a sensor. So this is the spring where the cam actuator from the camshaft is going to be pushing up and down in order to pressurize the input to the output, so you get many thousands of psi to push into the engine. A couple more bolts to remove now. Now this part here, you can see there's a little roller inside of there, and that roller is what's going to push up against that spring on the direct injection pump. Inside of here you can see it is coated with oil, because just like the camshaft, it needs to be lubricated. And this here is the triangular shape camshaft. Also to note, there's two oil galleys running under there from the head. One more bolt that was behind that landed in the oil pan, but that's fine. Looks like we have a giant cavity over here shaped like a pear. Vacuum diaphragm that connects to that vacuum line on the valve cover. Alright, fine. While I'm on the passenger side, might as well take care of this fuel rail and the ignition system. I like how they give you a pry point for these direct injectors. Here's the injectors. This one came out pretty easy. There's that vacuum hose. I bet this is part of the PCV system because it went right to the intake. So before I get the valve covers off, I gotta get this front cover off for the timing side. Now this is very known to leak. You can see this one's absolutely soaked with oil. So these are your variable valve timing actuators. Now they don't have oil in them. These are the push type, where they actually a solenoid that pushes out, and that's going to push on these variable valve timing actuators, which are going to fill them up with oil to phase the cams. It looks fairly clean on the inside, no sludge. Now that is a timing chain tensioner. Pay attention to the shape of this valve cover. You can see there's these little sunken in areas, and then these ribs here that's built in for strength. That means they've really paid attention to optimizing this valve cover for lightweightness, but also for a reasonable amount of strength for its durability and lifespan. This is not just one flat cover that you'd find like a Corolla or something. I like that they give you these pry points. Feels like there's a bolt still in it somewhere. Aha, I caught you. Here we go. So here's what it looks like under the valve cover. Things are pretty clean. Now if you do look closely, you can see that there's some tiny scoring on these bearing surfaces here, indicating that something was wrong with the oiling system. Maybe some debris ran through it. That's kind of the same thing here on the camshaft. You can see that there's a bit of scoring on these surfaces over here, indicating again that there was probably some oiling failure. The timing chain slide is also part of the valve cover. There's no separate piece on top of here. They've optimized it to have a least number of pieces. There is a little bit of wear inside of there. Now these were actually kind of common on the very early models for them to wear out. And here's that weird plastic contraption that goes straight down to the sump. Note that they've also put these tabs over here so that the camshafts sit flush before you actually put that cover on. Otherwise the pressure of the valve springs are actually going to pop these up and make it difficult to seat properly. I'm going to be removing the exhaust manifold. It's a very simple steel manifold. There is one nut over here that I have no idea how to take out. It was already out, which is a benefit for me. I wonder what the other side's like. Now the camshafts have to come off in order to get these two bolts off, to get the head off. So before we do that, I'm going to remove this timing chain here. That tells me that that tensioner was actually pretty good. Interesting, there's no actual spring inside of here. It feels like oil pressure is probably the only thing that pushes this out. This is why all modern engines with hydraulic tensioners are so oil sensitive. Mercedes did make an update to this part number because this was causing the main timing chain issue. So if you do have an earlier version of this engine, like a 2012 or so, make sure you get this update. I'm going to remove these little holders. Alright, let's see if I can get these loose from this chain here. Oh, it's oily. Okay, this is the exhaust camshaft. You can see this is the variable valve timing gear with that little plunger on there. It's going to take oil from these channels inside of here and direct it to phase the cams. The camshaft itself is actually very simple, you know, simple lobe that goes on top of a roller arm. Bare oil dripping out of this thing, look. At least we know it had lots of oil in it. As you can see, these are the lubrication holes for this camshaft, and that's how it's going to feed all the bearings. And as you can see, the head kind of extends around here. There's no separate timing cover that comes off, and this would be the chain tensioner. There's nothing holding this roller arm to the hydraulic lifter. It just pops right out and it's free. Now, some people say that this engine is actually related to the Pentastar engine, even though it's not. Now, the Pentastar engines, that was an issue because there's no clip holding these two things, and they would literally just fall off into the valve train and damage things like the valves, the rockers, or even the engine when the piston strikes the head. I'm going to remove these two E10 head bolts. Now the head bolts on these are an E-Torx E16. This head has a loop for some reason that holds the water inlet over here, and of course everything's just coming apart because it's plastic. So there is a secret hidden bolt here that covers the bolt for the timing chain slide. Wow, a hex on a Mercedes. That would be a Torx. Okay, I got a hex in there. I don't know if it's gonna... Yeah, it's gonna strip. That's not working. So I tried getting that out and it broke. So this is the bolt that supposedly goes in and holds this timing chain slide. There's another thing that's holding it down so I can't get this head off. I just think I can get this in here or no. Alright, don't try anything you see this crowbar do at home or at a shop because I am not a professional. Gotta give it up to Mercedes. These timing chain guides are not fragile. One bolt really messed me up here and that's why I prefer to have a separate timing cover that comes off so you can access the timing chains properly. I'm gonna move over to this side of the engine and get everything off so that I can get the timing cover off and then deal with that. Get the driver's side exhaust manifold off. Once again, that bolt was missing, and that's the hardest one to get. Interesting design on the exhaust ports. These two outer one are D-shaped, and the middle one is a black hole. Next up, I'm going to remove this oil filter. Now, it's nice that this is right on top of the engine, so it's easy to access. This is a cartridge-style oil filter. I don't notice any metal particles in there. Probably turn this into a little shop coffee cup or something. I'm changing sockets more frequently than my wife changes clothes here. I think I'm going to look for another impact driver so I don't have to keep swapping sockets every time I'm doing a teardown. I'm going to remove the front timing cover on the driver's side. Sorry if the scene was a little dark. I forgot to turn on my secondary lights and my tertiary lights. Is that better? Use the variable valve timing solenoid. Might as well just take the whole cover off. Now let's move to the back of the head here. We've got the vacuum pump and a couple of brackets. So I know I don't have the correct tool, but I think Mercedes could improve on socket clearance when they're designing things to be taken apart like this. And I can only pray that an 8mm 1/4" drive is going to work. Now usually on turbocharged engines you have vacuum pumps because, oh, this one's gushing oil all over. So here we've got the vacuum pump. You can see as I move this here, this is kind of the outlet. It's got a little bit of a valve on it. And this is the inlet that's going to suck air in from the air intake manifold that sat on top of the engine to control all of those vacuum switching valves. Now this here is a little valve to control the amount of air that's going back in as this thing is rotating. It spins with the intake camshaft. Typically it's more turbocharged engines that have vacuum pumps because they have very low pressure in the intake that you can't really power things like a brake booster. This one's naturally aspirated and it still has one. Looks like this is a plastic water line that comes from the back of the head here. I don't know what to say with these plastic cooling components. They don't really hold up well over time. Alright, next up I'm going to just remove this engine bracket. Let's buzz off this cam cover. Get it loose. It's coming with the injector. Still do notice a little bit of scoring on the bearing surfaces for the camshaft. Now let's get the timing chain tensioner out of here. Kind of expanded and stuck itself in there. So I've removed the tensioners, very similar to the other side. There is this little plastic wear point over here. Now let's get these little holders off here. Now we have slack in the chain. These camshafts up and remove them. The exhaust camshaft. A little bit of wear on that surface there. I'm going to remove these E10s. The bolts on these are E-Torx 16. We do have that timing chain slide at the front, but let me see if I can just break this free. Oh! Yay, got this one off. Alright, a little bit of liquid inside of here. And all of the pistons say that they're present. Here is the head gasket. Very simple multi-layer steel. Now, unlike a lot of the newer Ford EcoBoosts that have an actual slit here, this one has a full-on cavity here, but the walls are a lot thicker, which means that you're not going to blow head gaskets as easily as you have coolant traveling in between here to cool off this very hot area in between the pistons. You do have a very simple open deck design. I was actually thinking it was going to be strengthened up a bit, especially this engine being used in turbocharged applications. You can see here I just snapped that timing chain tensioner off. I'm going to work on taking off the timing chain cover next. The engine was seized, that's why it was easy to break this off before I put it on the stand. Alrighty, pull this timing cover off. So the cover itself is pretty hefty. It does have these coolant jackets that go to the water pump in the front here, and this oil one that goes to the oil filter at the top here. And as you guys know, I don't like things attached to the timing cover because this is yet another interface that could fail and cause an internal leak. And here we have a look at the M276's timing chain setup. Now it does look a little confusing, but first of all, note that this is a 60-degree V engine as opposed to a 90-degree V engine like the previous M272. That eliminates the need for a balance shaft, so the engine doesn't vibrate. Of course, that makes it more simple. However, we do have 4 timing chains. You do have a chain here at the bottom that goes to the oil pump. We do have another chain here that goes to this counter gear in the middle, and then this counter gear has got 2 chains going to each head respectively to power the intake and exhaust camshafts on the left and right side. And here's where we come to some carnage. It seems like maybe somebody was here before, changing maybe a crank seal or something. That's what that looks like. We do have some RTV, or something really hairy like RTV. More RTV inside of here, and there is more back there. There is also more down in the sump. I think this is kind of sad because somebody's negligence ruined a good engine. I see something inside of here. I don't know what this is. There's more bits of RTV in here. We can see bits of broken plastic at the bottom there. I'm going to remove this center countershaft bolt. There's a tensioner for the crank to countershaft gear. That's also hydraulic as well. That makes it easy for this to come apart. And there's the counter gear. See now if we can slide these guides off to get the head off. Ooh, can we get it off now? Yay! Finally got the head off. Alright, here's the head gasket. Yeah, I don't see anything bad with the pistons as yet. The slide just comes off like that. This is the tensioner side, and I like how they've encased it with metal. The tensioner is going to press up against here and pivot over here. Plastic inside of here is merely just to reduce friction against this chain. This chain actually has sides. You can see the bottom side here has teeth, and the top side here is flat. Now, when you take things apart like this, you kind of learn how they work and how they were built. You also appreciate things like build quality. I can tell you by tearing this thing down that Mercedes is on a next level, especially compared to its competition when it comes to fitting things in and optimizing everything. Yeah, it's way overly complex, and there's only one way you can take things apart, at least so far, down to the short block. Let's remove this oil cooler. Oh no, I see oil and coolant mixing. Or is that just coolant mixing with the oil right now? Well, that's what the inside of the oil cooler looks like. These 2 passages here are for the oil to go in and out, and then this one is for coolant going directly into the cooling jacket, and that goes out to this hose. Essentially what you're doing is exchanging the warmth of the oil with the coolant so it can get cooled off by the radiator. Having cool oil is very important, even more so on the turbocharged variant. Right now it's time to flip this over and make some mess. Who needs pigment when you got your baby daughter's pants? Put that there to sap it up. Alright, underneath the M276 we have a tiny little steel oil pan. Ow, my finger! Oh no! Oh no! Alright guys, this is crazy. I wonder if these are rubber bits from the serpentine belt. They got sucked through the front seal or something. This is absolutely crazy. Let me make a YouTube short. I'll be back in a sec. Alright, and check this mess out. This is the oil pickup tube, and this is likely serpentine belt material that went inside of here. Now the brown pieces you see inside of here are likely that front crankshaft seal that we found inside the timing cover. Look at this. This is really bad. What likely happened is the serpentine belt disintegrated, got sucked through the front crank seal. They likely replaced the crank seal without thinking about the oil pan. All of the serpentine belt material made it down inside of the oil pan. Look at that. Damn. Parts of the seal inside of here. See if I can pull off this oil pickup tube. There's just chunks of stuff coming out there. This engine definitely died of oil starvation. There's some more chunks inside of there. Alright, let's remove this upper oil pan here to see what carnage lies within. I see some bolt bosses here. If I remove this plastic piece, by the way, this hole is for the drive shaft because this is an all-wheel drive 4MATIC. You're supposed to remove this hex and get an extension in here. And we'll see if I can snake this out. So inside of here is a 12mm hex head. That's what's holding the oil pan on all the time. As you'd expect, there's a lot of tiny bits and pieces of that serpentine belt that went in there. And this is the money shot right here. This is the oil pump, and the pickup tube would bolt up to here. Look at all the fragments inside of here. It's absolutely caked with rubber shreds. I can't believe someone's negligence let this motor blow just like this. I'm going to take off these T40 holding the oil pump on next. So this windage tray is actually part of the pickup tube as it plugs in here. So let's get that off first. Interesting they made that part of that. And we'll move this bolt here. And then this will come off like that as an assembly. I don't see anything obviously burnt out on the connecting rods. I want to see if this engine turns over now. That's a lot of force. That engine is seized, dude. In order to get this engine mount off, you gotta get this E12 Torx bolts, but one thing they really overlooked was socket clearance. I can't get my socket on there with a regular 3/8. Now the bottom of the engine seized up, but it's in the correct spot where I could probably get about 4 of these pistons out. So let's start by removing these E-Torx connecting rod caps. This is what I call encouragement. Alright, that bearing actually looks pretty good. So in the process of removing cylinder number 1's connecting rod here, you can see that the bearing is actually lapped over on itself, and that's called the spun connecting rod bearing. This is the bearing cap that came off of. You can see it's a little bit burnt up from all the heat. I also saw the engine turnover. Yep, so I think that is the one that unseized this engine. I'm going to push the 4 pistons out. One thing my brother taught me about your underwear is that if one side gets dirty, you can always flip it over to the other side because it's going to be nice and clean. And we'll just sap up all that oil. That's why I don't like filming in here. Look at the mess across the floor. At this point, my daughter's probably the biggest contributor to this channel. Kids grow up so fast, don't they? Next, I'm going to be taking off these main cap bolts. Now, these are also cross-bolted on the side here. Milwaukee 1/2" impact. Let's go. Now luckily I removed the bolts for this rear main seal. So this is a really cheap rear main seal. It's all bent up, so I'm pretty sure you'd have to replace the whole piece if you're doing a seal job. Again, don't try anything you see this hammer do at home. That one looks really rough. Typically these main bearings will get lubricated first in the system, and then the connecting rod bearings, that's why they tend to seize up. However, this is still a lot of damage, which kind of shows how much debris ran through the system, enough to actually damage the main bearings as well. I always love how V6 engines have 4 bolts, and then they're also cross-bolted on the side. It kind of makes the block nice and secure at the bottom end, so you can fetch a lot of power. Now I can remove the crankshaft from the block. So now that we're down to the bare block, let's take a closer look at the oil lubrication system. Essentially, we've got the oil pump, which is going to sit over here, and that's going to draw oil down into the oil cooler area on the side of the block, as well as the oil filter area that sat on the timing cover. And this is what the oil interface looks like on the timing cover, with the filter sitting at the top here. I never liked this design because it's always a point of leaks. Now, oil from the filter area is then going to be sent down through this galley over here, down to the center of the block, where we have a galley that's drilled down the middle. Now, the galley down the middle feeds the main bearings as well as the connecting rod bearings on the crankshaft through these holes here, as well as these piston wall sprayer. Now here's one drawback. In order to feed the driver's side head, we have that galley that runs down the middle, and that's going to feed this channel that comes up to here. However, that channel is only encased by this thin piece of rear main seal, which of course could leak, and then you'd lose oil pressure to the entire driver's side head. Oil from that channel is going to be sent down this oil galley here into the head interface to the driver's side head. Now, while we're on the subject of oil, let's take a look at the oil pump. Now, it is a variable oil pump because it has this oil control solenoid here that controls its output. The tensioner is pretty unique here, where it's got a built-in spring. You can remove that. You can remove the chain. Now, this is actually a pressed-on gear, so might need a presser to pull that off. Definitely helps if you get all the bolts out. Alrighty, here we have a gear. Nope, this is a vane style oil pump. So here you can see we've got these little vanes that are going to move in and out, and this is going to rotate elliptically in this housing over here. Now, as you see, normally the housing of the oil pump and the pinion is not aligned. Now, as you apply oil pressure to this side, the housing is going to move to be in line with each other. And that's actually going to produce less oil pressure, as the vanes are now centered on each other, as opposed to having a large difference. Now, the computer can vary how much oil pressure is produced by activating this oil control solenoid to send more oil pressure over on this side. Now, during the teardown, it was pretty obvious that this was the one that caused the engine to seize up. Let's see if I can remove this bearing here from the crankshaft. Alright, well, I was able to mangle off that bearing. Check out all the damage on the crankshaft here. It's very, very rough, and the bearing itself wore down to the copper. Now, basically what happens is the main bearings are supposed to feed the connecting rod bearings, but because we had so much junk in the lubrication system, it starved this bearing of oil, and of course, eventually with heat and no lubrication, this decided to seize up, and the engine stopped, even though it had plenty of oil in it. Now, the pistons and connecting rods themselves actually look pretty decent. Note, this is a direct injection, so you do have this O on the top here to help with the combustion. Now, the oil control rings on this one actually don't look too bad. There are a little bit of space in between here, Maybe this engine wasn't burning oil yet, but it does have quite a little bit of carbon on the top. For a 3.5 liter engine, I was expecting a little bit more of a chunkier piston, but maybe they've really optimized the weight on this. I also don't notice any skirt wear on any of these as well. Now, oil that comes into the head is going to come across a galley at the top here and in the middle here that's going to power these hydraulic lifters to take up any slack between the roller arm and the camshaft so you don't have to do valve adjustment. And I do notice out of all the camshaft bearing surfaces, this one is extremely rough. Once again, that's due to oil starvation. Now the bottom of the heads themselves actually look pretty nice. One thing to note is the middle here is where the injectors stick out of, and then the spark plugs come in on the side. By the way, this camshaft contraption here at the back of the head is actually supposed to be an oil trap, part of the PCV system. Now carbon buildup is a real thing, so I'm going to see if I can remove these valves here to show you. Push these valves through. Now as you see, the back of the valves here are full of carbon. This is where air has to flow into the engine. Now if you start carbing that thing up, well, you're going to start starving the engine of air and your engine is going to start misfiring. Carbon could also start building up on the valve itself, and if it doesn't get hot enough to burn it, it's going to prevent the valve from seating, and then you have a compression issue. Now not only do the valves get clogged up, but the ports that go into them also get clogged up because of direct injection. There's no gasoline to wash this off. You will have to do a manual cleaning every so often in order to get that carbon off. Sometimes soaking in a solvent works, but generally driving it really hard once in a while, called the Italian tune-up, sometimes works as well. I mean, come on, if you're buying a C350 with 300 horsepower, you gotta push it really hard once in a while. While we're here, let's take a look inside this vacuum pump. So essentially we have a roller. And a sweeper. Now as this sweeper comes in from behind here, it's going to create some negative pressure, and that negative pressure is going to come out through this channel here that goes into the air intake, so you can control those vacuum switching valves. And of course you have to have that exhaust, and that's where we saw that oil squirting out from this little valve at the back here. This has to be lubricated as well, which is why all the parts are oily. The sweeper itself feels like it's made of plastic, and this is a really nice piece of machine work here. Alright, here we have the thermostat housing. Once again, I'm going to express my hatred for plastic coolant parts. Let's just take this apart and see what it looks like. Do you think this is going to come apart or it's going to break? Oh, that actually came apart. Wow, here you can see the thermostat. And that's a look at the Mercedes M276 engine and how it works. Now please, if you are a technician or a DIY, or you have no idea what you're doing, please do your diligence and make sure things like this don't end up in the oil pump. This engine ultimately failed because of user negligence. They replaced the oil front crankshaft seal and didn't think that the serpentine belt is shredded up inside of the sump itself, and that's ultimately what starved the engine of oil and caused this rod bearing to give out, seizing the engine. Now with all this junk that ran through this lubrication system and the damage you see on all the bearing surfaces, this engine would have had to be rebuilt and remachined anyway, so that's why the user just opted to swap in a used engine. Speaking of rebuilding, later versions of this engine use nanoslide technology, which is a coating inside of the cylinder walls. You can't really rebuild those, but you can see here clearly this one has the steel insert. They said they were just driving and it stopped. Thing didn't even have 200k on it, and I have no idea how they got the torque converter bolts off because I got it completely seized. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one.